Hey y'all, what is up? Keasbey here. So today I'm going to be talking about my updated Floowandereeze deck profile for the post-May 2022 format. But before we get into all that, don't forget to drop this video a like and subscribe to the channel for even more. And if you like the playmat you see in this video, check out the link in the description to get your own. So I just want to preface, this is the list that I've been having solid success with so far. But I am still tinkering with parts of it, so as always, don't take this as the definitive Floowandereeze build, but consider it a good starting place for your own builds. Alrighty, so let's get right into it. First off, we have our three one-card starters, Floowandereeze and Rabina. For brevity's sake, I'm going to sum up the shared effects of all our level 1 birds right now, but just remember the next three Floowandereeze monsters share the following, in addition to their individual effects. First, if this card, while face up, would leave the field in any way or bound for any destination, it is banished face up instead. Just a couple of notes on this. If you get hit with evenly matched, for example, your level 1 Floowandereeze will banish face up regardless because their condition of being banished face up supersedes evenly matches banishing them face down. Second, if you self-target a small bird with Ryza, it will be banished instead of going to the top of the deck. This second one doesn't come up too often, but it's relevant once in a while and good to know. Secondly, on resolution of their individual effects, you can normal summon another winged beast. And third, if they are banished and you normal summon a winged beast, you can return them to your hand. These are all hard once per turns, and the activation of any effect on our level 1 Floowandereeze restricts you from special summoning for that turn. One last small note. If the activation of the effect is negated, you are no longer under the special summon restriction. Again, this isn't often relevant, but it's good to be aware of. Okay, after all that, let's talk about Rabina's individual effect. She will search out a level 4 or lower winged beast. Pretty great. She can start your combo full on by herself and end on a pretty good board. It's not ideal because this one card start does lose to most hand traps, but you try to back her up. Next up, we have 3 copies of Floowandereeze and Eaglin. In addition to the shared level 1 effects, he can search out a level 7 or higher winged beast. We're on 3 of him as well, despite not being a 1-card start, but he becomes full combo with any other Floowandereeze, and using Unexplored Winds and Ryza, we can actually keep his effect alive throughout the game, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Next up, we have 1 copy of Floowandereeze and Toucan. Toucan's effect is to target one of your banished Flouander cards, so this applies to spells and traps as well, and return it to your hand. So I've actually toyed with the idea of bumping this guy up to 2. I really like Toucan, and Toucan just interacts so well with map and Advent of Adventures, and creating a loop of just recycling Dreaming Town over and over again. I've kept it at 1 though because you have a lot of ease of access to it, and because on its own it's not really a starter, and you do need to have a banished Flouander target in order to resolve its effect. But as the game draws on, Toucan does become a very, very important card, especially for outgrinding your opponent. Next up, at our last level 1 Flouander, we've got Floowandereeze and Stree. Stree's effect is to target a card in graveyard and banish it. So I just want to call out, as I've seen this mistake made online, be very careful what you target with Stree. If your opponent can move the target out of your graveyard before Stree resolves, Stree will proceed to resolve without effect, meaning you won't get the summon afterwards since the first part of their individual effects has to resolve properly in order for that summon to happen. I know it sounds fairly obvious, but I've seen the mistake made before, so I just wanted to mention it. I'm actually down to 1 Stree now. I was using 2 for consistency reasons, but Stree is really the worst possible starter bird, even with map, since if you don't have a card in graveyard to banish, you use map summon on Stree, recover whatever you banished with map, and then you have to use your game mechanic normal summon to actually get your combo going. The second Stree has been replaced with another winged beast that we'll see in a little bit, so the advent count is still the same, but we are down 1 level 1 Floowander. Street is exceptional as the game goes on though, as you can loop it with Toucan to banish your Floowandereeze spell traps from the graveyard and immediately recover them with Toucan, or M-Pen as well. Just any Floowandereeze card is easily recoverable in this way. Following our level 1 birds, we have Honorary Floowandereeze, Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. I actually don't have a ton to say about this card really. I do think that there kind of is a bit of over-reliance on it at times, and I just want to say I don't think Barrier Statue should be the win con in and of itself. I think the bigger win con involving Barrier Statue is using it to enable your other plays. Yes, I understand that Barrier Statue can win a game by itself 100%, but that should not be your go-to plan. Your go-to plan with Barrier Statue should be force your opponent to normal summon so that you can start a Ryza loop, or start tributing away their resource, or sending away, I should say, their resources with Unexplored Winds and M-Pen. Barrier Statue is important, but again, just don't be overly reliant on it, is what I'm gonna say. So, a new addition to the deck, we're gonna be looking at Harpy Harvest. Okay. Full disclosure, I'm still testing this, and I kind of have mixed feelings about her. Harpy has 3 effects, first of which she is always treated as Harpy Lady while on the field. This aids with synergy with Harpy's Featherstorm, which is really solid, but we'll talk about more once we get to the side deck. Her other effect is, on normal summon, you can target one other winged beast you control and one face-up monster your opponent controls and bounce them to the hand. So the simplest way to explain the usefulness is if you end on a not so great board with maybe just map and statue, you can use her basically as mini Ryza off of any Floowandereeze monster to bounce your opponent's normal summon back to protect statue in a pinch. Also, when I say bounce a small Floowandereeze monster, I mean banish it, because again, their banish effect supersedes any leaving the field conditions. This can be great for setting up chain blocks for your next turn. She also has interesting synergies with M-Pen, bouncing it back to the hand so you can resummon it for another search, something that has come up for me now more than once. She also has an effect that if she's in the graveyard because she was sent there this turn, you can add a level 4 winged beast with 1500 or less attack from your deck to your hand, which is a statue which can be summoned off of Dreaming Town, keep in mind. Overall, I'm still testing her out, and I do kind of have mixed feelings about how useful she's been. Next up, another one of DD Crow, and huge shout out to my buddy Emo Karibo on Instagram for this First Ed Ultimate Rare pristine copy of it. Okay, so I love DD Crow. It is a great second search draw for Bina if you already have the statue, or if you just don't need the statue. It is a hard counter to Branded in Red, which is really important because as of recording this video, Despia is the tier 1 deck right now. And it's just potentially great interruption for anything that needs to use the graveyard for anything, and especially since it's on a quick effect, you can snipe stuff out. I could go on and on about why I love this card, but I 100% think that you should be on one of these for Floowandereeze. Now, let's talk about our big birds. First, we have one copy of Floowandereeze and M-Pen. So, kinda suspect, I'm only on one copy, and a lot of builds out there are on 2. Hear me out. I really don't think you need the second M-Pen. I know nothing on this card is a once per turn, so having 2 does have an advantage there, but I find M-Pen to be so easily looped and recycled between Advent and Toucan and Ryza that I've never felt like I needed a second one in a game, with the exception of going in for lethal damage, but at that game state, I'm usually so far in control of the game that it doesn't really matter. Or if I'm that confident, I can just commit Ryza to the field and let it sit there without bouncing it back. If I were to play a second M-Pen, I would probably replace the Harpy Harvest with it as well. I like her inclusion in the deck, it's just another card that I found I don't need at times. Just to highlight M-Pen's Floodgate effect, something to keep in mind as I'm still seeing some confusion about it, M-Pen doesn't actually negate anything, but instead prevents your opponent from activating effects of special summon monsters in attack position. This is an important distinction for a card like, let's say, Cherubini, for example, where You don't really care about Cherubini's effect, it's just the ability to pay the cost of sending something to graveyard that's important. Under M-Pen, you can't even send that cost because you can't activate the effect. And one other note about M-Pen, don't sleep on the fact that the banishing a card from your hand to half the attack of whatever she's battling, by the way this works if she's being attacked or attacking, is a great way to set up chain blocks on your opponent's turn. Next up, we have our Omni Negate in Mist Valley Apex Avian. Not much new to say about this beyond reminding all y'all that this is not a once per turn, and when you have winds live on the field, you can always negate a bird coming back to your hand to get Apex Avian back in hand to resummon later down that chain and act as removal. Check out our video about the non-once per turn loops this deck can do for an example of that happening. I will also say, I've seen some lists cutting this card, and I do majorly disagree with that. Granted, I don't make it in every game, and the next card we're going to talk about tends to be the one that comes up more, but having this just in case you get hit with an early back row wipe, or if you're forced into a position where you can just continuously make one-for-one trades until the game is done, Apex Avian is the card for that. Lastly, we have my personal favorite win condition of this deck, Rise of the Mega Monarch. So, we've essentially had a Yada lock in this deck before Yada came off the list in the form of Rise of the Mega Monarch. On a 2800 body, non-once per turn, spin one card on the field, either field by the way, and one card in the graveyard, again, either graveyard, looking at UD Shifter, back to the top of the deck. Then, if you tributed a wind monster to summon this big guy, bounce one additional card, including itself, back to the hand. Plus, a tribute summoned wind monster, like M-Pen, can be the whole tribute cost for this monster. The damage this card can do is insane. This is why you use it alongside Barrier Statue to just completely lock out a game. I always try to, unless I'm specifically going for lethal, always bounce Ryza back to the hand just to keep it in rotation, and especially since it isn't a once per turn, if you are combining this with Barrier Statue and you have map, there is a non-zero chance that you will summon it off map and then be able to summon it again off Dreaming Town to potentially clear out some back row. Just a big note to keep in mind. If you do summon this, enabling your summon with Unexplored Winds, you will get the first part of the effect since it is treated as a tribute summon, but you will not get the bonus effect of bouncing something back to the hand since Winds sends to grave, not tributes, and Ryza specifically has to tribute a wind monster as part of its summon to get that bonus effect. Following that, we're going into the hand trap department. We have 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. So this is mostly a Despia inclusion, and not because I'm overly concerned about Mirror Jade Dragon or Ice Jade Dragon, I forget the name of it, but banish my M-Pen, he's only gonna come back. But because Branded Fusion is access to Zombie World, plus more monsters. Ash is really useful against that because it stops the Necroworld Banshee from hitting the graveyard, plus it can also stop Fusion Destiny and Red Eyes Fusion as well. And a lot of rogue matchups do have fairly large Ashwell choke points, so I just like having it around. It also serves as a non-winged beast normal summon if you ever need to make an emergency Nightmare Phoenix to out-aid there can only be one in game 1. And the last hand trap that really helps make this deck tick, we've got Dimension Shifter. Oh man, I could go on and on about Dimension Shifter, but I'll keep this short and sweet. Dimension Shifter protects you from Droll, Effect Veiler, Ghost Ogre, Necroworld Banshee being sent off of a Branded Fusion as well. It shuts off a lot of decks' major plays and forces them into suboptimal boards that we can crack pretty easily. It also banishes all our Floowandereeze spell traps and M-Pen, making them very easy to recover off Toucan. It just does so much for this deck, and also, for typing reasons, it can be resummoned with Selene to make access code in a pinch if you ever need an emergency out to Geomathmech Final Sigma. Yeah, that card. Okay, so that's our monster lineup. Let's go into spells and traps. First off, we have 3 copies of our field spell, Floowandereeze and the Magnificent Map. So this card is great and I love it. First, the activation of this card itself is not once per turn, meaning if you have 2 of them in your hand and your opponent destroys the first one before you activate its on-field effect, you can activate the second copy in your hand and then go off. So, during your main phase, you can reveal a level 1 Flounder in your hand, banish another Flounder card with a different name. Any card, by the way, so it can also be M-Pen or a Spell Trap depending on what you need at that moment, but just keep in mind you're not limited to another level 1 if you don't need the chain block. Then, on resolution of this effect, normal summon the revealed bird. This is double summon with upside, as you still have a game mechanic normal summon after you end the summon spree that you'll go on with this. The second effect, if your opponent normal summons, you can activate it, and on resolution of that activation, normal summon a Floowandereeze monster from your hand. 2 notes on this. First, this is usable on either turn. This really only comes up in the mirror match, but you should be aware of it. Second, it is any Floowander monster. This includes M-Pen, which has some great interactions with Unexplored Winds, which we'll talk about in more detail later on. My only complaint about map is it's not a self-starter, in that you still do need a level 1 Floowander to go off. I'd actually cut this card, but I did some math and ended up adding it back in. We have 1 copy of Terraforming. So map, despite not being a starter, does turn all of our small birds into starters, and Terraforming actually enables Stree to be a complete starter off of map. But crunching the numbers, in a 40 card deck, you have about a 30% chance of getting map in your opener. Whereas in a 41 card deck, the Terraforming bumps it up to giving you map access 35% of the time in your opener. This is a hard lose to Droll and Lockbird, keep in mind. But Terraforming can also sometimes eat an Ash Blossom, which is never a bad thing. Next up, in the consistency department, we're going to play 3 copies of Advent of Adventure. I mean, this card is insane. It banishes for cost, which is a huge thing so that it dodges Impermanent Veiler for you. It can add another bird or the field spell depending on what you need. This, with M-Pen and Winds, is an insane advantage loop, as I've shown in other videos, and importantly, it enables 3 more uses of M-Pen in the grind game before running out of search targets. It's only happened once where I got that deep into a grind, but still, as always, good to know. Also, this does help out with a Shotgun Delancia against you, allowing you to get at least 1 baby bird banished and searched since it's on quick play speed, before you are locked out of being able to banish for the turn. It is also marvelous ash bait once you have everything you already need in rotation, since once you've started your engine properly, the cost of banishing a bird to dodge negation actually almost becomes more important than the effect of searching. Following that, we've got 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity. Just an overall great card, and we don't use our whole extra deck often, if at all, so no reason to ever not go for the full 6. Again, if you already have everything you need, this is another piece of marvelous Ash Blossom bait. Just don't forget about the half damage clause on it, so if you're ever in a position where you're well off but draw this, just wait until after the battle phase to resolve it if possible. Next up, we've got 3 copies of Pot of Duality. Everything we do is normal summons, so this is basically just a free version of the 3 banish effect on Prosperity. Do keep in mind, it does lock you out of special summons if you ever do need to make an emergency extra deck play, but again, more likely than not, you're not going to need to. Now we have another suspect inclusion depending on who you ask, but I like keeping it in, my 1 copy of Gold Sarcophagus. Again, another card that I've seen cut in other builds, but I personally very much like having this, as it acts as a miniature version of the field spell, giving you access to a small banish bird or any Floowander card if you have 2-con, and a chain block for that first summon that you make. Even late in the game, at worst, you can move a card out of the deck that you'd rather not draw, so even when this card becomes more of a brick, it is a brick that can remove another brick from your deck. Then, to help our plays resolve, we have a single allowed copy of Called by the Grave. Look, I love this deck. There are hands that lose to Ash, and then you have to sit there awkwardly hoping for the best. Called by comes in clutch when you need it, and even if you can go off without it, it is still a good offensive option, and again, good in the Despia matchup as a hard counter to Branded in red. Next up, we have 1 copy of Unexplored Winds. I won't go too deep into this because I have another video that talks pretty heavily about how good this card is and why, but the two major points are, its effect to send to the graveyard instead of tributing is continuous and does not activate. Also, to address some questions I've seen, there is no conflict with D-Shifter because sending to the grave with this card is not considered a cost, but is actually just part of the effect, and that you can continuously cycle back a high-level winged beast with its second effect in order to keep Eagling live throughout a grindier game, while also drawing additional resources at the same time. Something new that I can mention about this card is that you can tribute set using it, but that comes with some conditions. So to tribute set enabled by Unexplored Winds, you must be using your game mechanic normal summon for the turn. Unexplored Winds acts as an effect that is modifying the mechanic of tribute summoning, which as a mechanic does include tribute setting. However, a card like M-Pen or the True Draco spells or traps that tell you to summon on resolution of their effects are referring to the action of normal/tribute summoning, and therefore it must be done face up because the action of normal summon or tribute summoning is considered different than the action of setting or tribute setting. It is a bit of a confusing distinction, but just to make it clearer, if a card is changing the requirement for a summon, it is modifying the mechanic of it, as is the case of Winds. While if a card is telling you to tribute summon or normal summon, it is referring to the action, therefore it must be done face up because it is not including the ability to set as part of that action. Drop a comment below if you want a further explanation on that. I haven't mentioned it in any of the previous videos I've done about Winds because I hadn't gotten a definitive answer until very recently asking a judge flat out about it and getting this explanation. Something to also note, the tribute set, even off a game mechanic, does not currently work on any simulators as of the recording of this video. Next, we've got some utility spells. First in 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. This deck has issues going second, especially if you missed the D-Shifter. Unfortunately, 3 interactions on field can be enough to stop our turn, or even potentially a single targeted negate if you don't have access to Map or Advent, so I tend to hedge my build to be a bit better if we are forced to go second. You can swap this card out with something in the side deck that we'll go into later if you want to have a more aggressive go first option, but I personally find that having access to a full board negate is remarkably good, and then you can selectively clear off what you need to be able to plan your opponent's turn afterwards. If you wanted to also play a bit more aggressively for going first and have a different option for handling cracking a board, this could also be Book of Moon, which you'll see we aren't running. The reasoning for that is Book is primarily, when you're going first, protecting you from Imperm or Veiler. I think we're okay covering the 3 possible Veilers with 3 copies of D-Shifter and 1 Called By, and the 3 possible Imperms with the 3 Advents, the Advents also overlapping into Veiler protection. So as far as going second, you can book one of your opponent's negations and either eat the negation or shut it off at the turn, but I just kind of prefer to have something that can deal with multiples of them at the same time. And the last spell for the deck, we've got 1 copy of Harpy's Feather Duster. Okay, so back row can be a huge problem for this deck, and I've started to actually see, especially in Despia, zombie worlds popping up in the main deck at this point. While I have a video detailing game 1 outs to zombie world and some other floodgates, having something that can just cleanly wipe them out with ease and allow my plays to go through is always the best option. Additionally, even not accounting for specialized floodgates for the Floowandereeze matchup, we do still have to contest with negations like Imperm, Chalice, Droplets, which Duster can clear before they become an issue. You can switch this out with a copy of Twin Twisters or a copy of Cosmic Cyclone for this if you want to be able to be a bit more reactive, especially in the Eldritch matchup where the problem cards can pop up in the draw or the standby phase. But again, as with the argument for Book of Moon versus Dark Ruler No More, I like having something that's got more widespread coverage going into a game blind and then siding in for more specialized cards. The last card we have in our main deck is one copy of Floowandereeze and the Dreaming Town. So this card is a win condition. The first effect lets you normal summon a level 4 or lower winged beast from your hand, which isn't limited to Floowandereeze monsters, allowing you some plays where, for example, you could drop Barrier Statue in response to a branded fusion, or in a rare instance, drop a Harpy Harvest to act as a miniature version of Ryza. But its bigger effect is, if you tribute summon a level 7 or higher monster, it actually isn't specific to winged beasts, not that that has ever come up, but again, good to keep in mind just in case. You can banish it from the graveyard and flip your opponent's entire field face down. Besides the obvious disruption, this serves a few more purposes. First, easy protection for your statue if you want to go into an Apex Avion, since they'll have committed a normal summon and they can't flip it back face up at this point. If you do this to a full field of special summon monsters and you have M-Pen, this will force them back face up into attack mode when they're flipped, preventing the activation of those monsters' effects for the turn. And lastly, when you banish it for the cost, it can act as a chain block if you need it to, and it makes it easily recoverable with Toucan to use over and over again. Overall, always be getting this card in rotation as fast as possible, and banish it ASAP so that it can be looped. It's also not a bad target for Ryza to spin back if you don't need the Book of Eclipse effect and have nothing else to spin back from the graveyards. So that's it for our main deck. Let's talk extra deck. So I like to look at the extra deck for Floowander as kind of a weird little toolbox for getting yourself out of niche situations. That said, if you do want to go an alternative route with it, you can jam this pretty full of Ghost Reaper targets and get a good amount of mileage out of it that way. But going into the extra deck as I prefer to play it. First we have our Dogmatica Maximus package, one copy of Elder Entity Nentis, one Cyber Dragon Nova, and the one Invoked Mechaba to summon off of it. These are probably cuttable, but every time that I seriously consider it, I manage to go into my turn 1 with a Mechaba. So it's 3 slots, I have the space, I keep them around. If you were to cut them, I'd suggest Lila the Light Charmer if you're maining Effect Veiler. Then if you have room in your main deck for an extra copy of Dogmatica Punishment, you could run Tri Brigade, Ferajit, and Shurag. Next up, we have our Charmer package of Wind, Water, and Dark. So these primarily exist to bridge you into access code lines if you ever need to make them, Dark being the most common one you will use to do this. Although with Verte Anaconda now banned, it might be a bit harder to make that bridge, but I'm still testing these to see how they do, and like with the Maximus package, I do have space for them. Something to keep in mind though, Halqifibrax is a water monster and a link 2, so you can go directly from Water Charmer, grab your opponent's Halq, and then go into a 4300 access code. Next up, we've got one copy of Linkuriboh. Linkuriboh is very good in here, not so much for its effect, but as a means to A, convert a small bird into a dark to make the Dark Charmer if you ever need to, but more importantly, B, convert a small bird into a Cyverse monster to out a There Can Be Only One using the next card in our extra deck. And that card is Nightmare Phoenix. So I think this is the only new card in here since the last time I showed the deck, but it came in replacing our own Crystron Halqifibrax. Phoenix is a great game 1 out to There Can Be Only One should you get hit with it, and the bridge to it is pretty simple with the Linkuriboh to get around the typing issues. Next up, we have one copy of Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians. So this is partly a relic of my older build that had Effect Veiler as a crossout target, making the Halqifibrax Selene access code climb possible, but now she's just kind of a niche Link 3 to make access code with if I have access to Dimension Shifter. I know this sounds kind of underwhelming, but again, we have the room for it, so why not just keep the option around just in case. Okay, now we're going to get into the more important extra deck monsters. First off, we have the aforementioned Access Code Talker. This is your out to Geomathmech Final Sigma, because Geomathmech Final Sigma is a problem for this deck because it has that blanket immunity, and it is just a little bit too big to out with any of our main deck monsters without the help of another extra deck monster that we have coming up. Again, the Charmers can act as your ladder to this, giving you a 4300 access code if you can grab a Link 2, and a 5300 access code if you can get to it via Selene, both being bigger than a 3k Final Sigma. Following that, we have another out to Final Sigma, or anything really, in Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. So in cases where we can just continually spam birds out onto the field to survive, we can make her out of nowhere to clear a problematic monster. It's not the most ideal move, and generally, if you could make her, you could probably have made an access code with 5300 attack, but she is an alternative option that does play under Nibiru if you are concerned about that and you ever find yourself needing her. Next, we have one copy of Lyrilisk Promenade Thrush. Thrush is the effect that you can detach one material from her to spin a spell trap back into the deck. So she is another viable out to Zombie World, or Skill Drain if you also have Advent of Adventure. We have a whole video going more in depth about that as well. She also has an attack boost effect that I have resolved all of one time to make exact game, but you know me and what I'm going to say, it's not going to come up often, but you should know it. And it can also get your Ryza to clear a Geomathmech Final Sigma by giving Ryza 3100 attack over Geomathmech's 3k. I know I keep talking about Final Sigma, but I know a lot of Virtual World players and they know to make Final Sigma against me, and it makes me sad. Then, finally, to close out the extra deck, we have our Zeus package consisting of Assembled Nightingale, Downer Magician, and Zeus himself. Again, covered this in much more detail elsewhere, but the premise is map can act as a double summon, and if you don't activate any of the small bird's effects, you can overlay into Nightingale and climb to Zeus from there. So now, let's go into the side deck. Okay, so a lot of the side deck is still in the testing phase, but I didn't want to hold off posting this, and while I am still testing everything, I will give the rationale for everything in here so that you can make a decision on your own of what to play. First off, we have 3 Harpy's Featherstorm, so I think this is an objectively good card to include. So it's insane, and there is an argument to even be main decking it, or at the very least main deck one of them, especially given that I am currently playing Harpy Harvest. For those who don't know, if you control Wind Monster, you blanket negate any monster effect from your opponent for the entire turn, from anywhere. It's wild. And if you have a Harpy monster on field, you can activate this from the hand. So the reason I'm currently not maining this card, first, if I'm summoning Harpy Harvest turn 1, I am well past the point where I'm being hand trapped or where the hand traps even matter anymore. So there's not really a need for me to play the card from my hand. If I open Harpist and Featherstorm and enough cards to go off afterwards, like map and everything else, then it's just a lot of cards to open for one interaction with 2 one-ofs that only one of which is searchable. So I don't think being able to play it from the hand, even including Harpy Harvest, is enough of a reason to move it into the main deck. The other reason I'm main decking Dark Roar No More over this card is, again, I mentioned this when talking about Dark Roar No More, I think this deck has a harder time going second than going first. Going into game 1 where I don't have that decision, I want to make the deck better at being able to crack through an established board than stopping it from establishing a board, which going into game 1, if our opponent isn't specifically maining cards to stop Flounder, is pretty easy to do if we have a half decent hand, and then from there we can just set up to control the game. Whereas going to game 2 and 3, if we know we're going first, we side this in to counteract whatever is being sided in against us and really solidify our very, very strong going first game. If you do want to play the deck more of a very aggressive go first style, you can main deck this over the Dark Roar No Mores, and I would just move the Dark Roar No Mores into this position side deck. But again, I recommend doing it the reverse because your go second game isn't as strong as your go first game with this deck. Next up, we have more back row hate in 2 copies of Lightning Storm. So I'm not playing evenly matched at all in here. I've been seeing Lancia sided a lot lately, and if ABC Therion takes off the way I think it's going to, I expect to see a lot more Lancia as well. And siding in a card that is going to lose to the Lancia that's already being sided in against me regardless of evenly matched just doesn't feel good. Also, Lightning Storm can deal with monsters if I ever need to clear an Appaloosa or something if my opponent gets stuck making a suboptimal board. All of that is a little bit ironic that I just mentioned losing to Lancia because the next card we have is 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. Yeah, I know, after everything I just said about Evenly. But Cosmic is chainable to Lancia if you ever need to, and if they drop the Lancia in response to map, we can just shotgun the Cosmic to whatever we need to, or just set it for use on the next turn and wait. Now, why Cosmic over Twin Twister? I personally prefer to pay the 1,000 life points over discarding a card from my hand, especially earlier in the game. Again, as much as I love this deck, it can have consistency issues at times. So there are times where you'll potentially need all the cards in your hand, and having one of them being taken up by Twin Twister and another one being taken up by something to discard off of Twin Twister can really hurt. Additionally, in the Eldritch matchup, banishing their spell traps is significantly more impactful than just destroying them and putting them in the graveyard for later use. Following that, we have 2 copies of Raigeki. This is something I'm kind of testing out, and to be honest, it's another thing that I'm kind of having mixed feelings about. It basically is acting as 2 additional copies of Dark Ruler No More that, while they can be negated, have the upside of completely wiping the monsters off the field, and I can deal damage afterwards, is kind of the way I see them. It does have a lot of good utility against some more rogue decks, and especially stun decks with things like Inspector Border, and it does clear fields that lean very heavily on monster negation or non-negation interactions. I'm still thinking about if there are other options, but definitely try this out yourself, and you can probably consider these flex spots if you are not feeling the Raigekis. Next up, we have 1 copy of Mystic Mine. This is another one that I'm still testing out. My major issue with it so far isn't so much anything to do with Mine itself being a bad inclusion. Stalling out is great, we can clear it on our own with our field spell, it can eat a negation, we can grab it off of terraforming. In theory, we can do weird plays with having Apex Avian on the field and then bouncing it back to negate something and turning the mine back on. There's a lot of interesting things that can be done with Mystic Mine, but the issue is our opponent's already siding in back row destruction against this deck to deal with map and Dreaming Town. So they're already pre-preparing for Mystic Mine without even knowing it. Again, I'm still testing it as I've had some games where dropping Mystic Mine to eat the 1 Omnigate on the field was enough to clear the way for map to do its thing. But again, I've also had games where I've gone into game 2, put Mine down, and just got hit with sided in back row removal that wasn't even originally intended for the Mine. So this could also be another flex spot if you're not feeling Mystic Mine. Next up, 2 copies of Dankoseka. Of course I was going to include this card. How could I not? Again, back row is a problem. I've talked a lot about why I love Dankoseka as a really cool option, especially being able to summon it on my opponent's turn, or just to reiterate, we can set Dreaming Town, then summon Dankoseka so her effect is offline, then as soon as our opponent commits any back row to the field, we can activate the Dreaming Town to turn Dankoseka's effect back on, play a turn on our opponent's turn, as well as locking out their back row. I did drop it down to 2 because I brought in the Lightning Storms, but I definitely think that you should include at least one of these. It's a lot of fun, and it can be a remarkably good lock card for some decks. And the last card that I'm testing out and kind of loving so far is 2 copies of Skullmeister. So this was a very specific include for Despia decks that are running Zombie World. Generally speaking, Necroroid Banshee is going to be sent to the graveyard as part of Branded Fusion, and then from there we can stop it when it activates with the Skullmeister. There's 2 drawbacks to this. The first drawback is Skullmeister does conflict with Dimension Shifter, but if you are in a situation where you're under Dimension Shifter, your opponent can't even send the Necroroid Banshee to the graveyard to activate it, so not a huge problem there. The other drawback is if the Necroroid Banshee is not banished from the graveyard, but is banished from anywhere else, we're kind of out of luck. There's already kind of not a ton that we can do about that outside of Apex Avian. Meister also is good in the Despia matchup against the little level 1 Despia guy that searches. I can't remember his name for the life of me when he goes to the graveyard. And it prevents Eldritch from reviving, it stops their traps from getting new traps, it hard stops anything Drytron that activates in the graveyard, it stops ABC pieces from activating in the graveyard, again if that deck takes off. You see where I'm going with this. It has a fair amount of generic usability, but is also a very good hard stop to the in-grave effect of Necroworld Banshee. I'm still testing this out, I've been liking it a lot so far though. That has been my updated Floowandereeze deck profile for the May 2022 format. I've been having a lot of success with it so far. The last locals I played in, I went 3-0 before I had to leave early, unfortunately. I'm still testing out the side deck, and specifically in the main deck, Harpy Harvest. I've been asked about what I'm playing personally a lot, so I wanted to get this video out there so all y'all can start experimenting with it yourselves. Sorry it got a bit long, but I want to always explain why I'm playing what I'm playing. As always, if you learned something, don't forget to drop this video a like, and if you have any questions on anything, feel free to comment below. Don't forget, if you liked the playmat you saw in this video, check the link in the description to get your own, and subscribe to the channel for even more. And I will catch you all later.